Hello, and my name is Pete Rushmer, and I'm your host today of A Half Dozen Things podcast. A Half Dozen Things is a podcast for business owners just like you. Whether you're an underdog hungry for success, or you're already smashing it but want to continue to level up, we are here each week for you to get insight and learning from the very best in the business. No fluff, no BS, and no self-proclaimed gurus talking about how easy business or life is. I'm really excited to be joined on the podcast today by Beverley Bell. Many of you will recognise Beverley's name because she was the former Senior Traffic Commissioner for 15 years. She was the Senior Traffic Commissioner from 2002 to 2017 when she retired from the role. And since then, she's been running her own consultancy and training business. It's an amazing interview and Beverley shares some incredible insight, and I really appreciate her joining us. I really hope you enjoy it. Please do share it with your friends. Thank you. Really pleased to be joined today by Beverley Bell. Beverley owns a company called Beverley Bell Consulting and Beverley Bell Training as well. And I'm really pleased to have you on the podcast, Beverley. It's an absolute pleasure. Is it okay, just for the purpose of the listeners, just to be able to give a brief introduction of who you are and what you're doing at the moment for work and that kind of thing?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you very much for inviting me to take part. I'm delighted. In terms of who I am and what I do, I'm a qualified solicitor. I qualified as a solicitor back in 1985. I know you're raising your eyebrows. You didn't think I was that old, did you, bless you?
I didn't, no.
No, I'm teasing. So qualified as a solicitor, and then I did criminal law, litigation, and then one day I was asked to do some prosecution for the Vehicle Inspectorate, because their solicitor had left, and I had to prosecute these funny things involving tachographs, and I had no idea what a tachograph was, didn't know the driver's hours rules existed, and I was hooked and really enjoyed it. And so in 2000, I applied to be a traffic commissioner. There were 3 posts going. To be honest, Peter, I thought I was too young and I thought I was too female, because they had always been recruited from the armed forces, and they were generally retired air vice marshals and brigadiers, and the silly buggers gave me one of the jobs. So that was in 2000 for the Northwest traffic area. I did that until I retired in 2017, and in the meantime I became the senior commissioner in 2011. And then when I retired, I decided that I would just do a little bit of consultancy to help clients, because I was never going to retire full time. And now my little bit of consultancy, which was going to be 2 days a week, is now full time, and I'm now employing 6 people. Wow. And I love it. Wow. And in terms of what I do, basically helping people, in a way, it's a very similar job to the old one. In a way, it's just putting people back on the road to compliance and helping them, being a critical friend and being really honest with them, telling them where things are great, where things could be better, and where things are awful, and helping and advising. And that's what I really enjoy doing. And then really quickly, and then I'll finish my answer. I'm sorry, I do ramble on a bit once.
No, I'm enjoying listening. It's fantastic.
No, not at all. I set up a training company recently, because often it seems that the consulting and the training piece go hand in hand. And so I thought, well, that would be a really good opportunity to sort of spread some best practice. So that's why the training company was formed. That's it. That's where I am now. No lunches, no long lunches with ladies, no shopping, no cooking, no gardening, no drinking gin in the afternoon, unfortunately.
No, still cracking. I think that's incredible how quickly your business has grown as well. I think that's testament to the quality of the service that you're offering, and the value that it adds to operators as well. I think is absolutely brilliant. I guess I've got a range of questions, and it's like I said, it's absolutely fantastic to have you on the podcast. I've got a range of questions, and I guess the first one, kicking it off, is what on earth? How do you end up becoming a traffic commissioner? What was it when you were younger that you really wanted to be? Because you certainly didn't grow up wanting to do that, surely. So what was the plan when you were once upon a time, Beverley?
Once upon a time, when I was a little girl, I wanted to be an air hostess.
Wow.
Along with most young girls of my age. I was fortunate enough to live abroad a lot when I was a child. and we used to fly a lot. That was in the days of BOAC and BEA. You're too young to remember. British Overseas Airways Corporation and BEA, British European Airways.
Yeah.
That was the days when air hostesses were air hostesses and they wore gloves.
Okay.
And they were very, very glamorous, and you had a boiled sweet on takeoff and a logbook from the captain. And so I wanted to be an air hostess because I thought it was the most glamorous thing in the world. And we used to fly to Africa. We used to stop at Rome to refuel and have lunch. And my father would have his safari suit on and my mother would have her gloves on and her travel suit. And it was all terribly glamorous. And then I realised that actually I probably wasn't cut out to be an air hostess. I can make a cup of tea and pour a gin and tonic, and I can do a bit of cooking, but that's about it. And then I decided I wanted to be an architect because I loved anything to do with property and buildings. And what I don't know about perpendicular architecture and Norman architecture is just not worth knowing. And then I discovered you needed physics at that stage and you had to be good at maths. And I was awful at that, and I was awful at science.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, terrible. Absolutely no blinking idea. So that was out of the window. And I thought, well, I quite like interior design. And I still love interior design. And when I retired, I was going to do an interior design course, and I enrolled and I did 4 hours of it.
Really? Is that all?
That's all. I thought, I'll do this once a week. And then lockdown came and I thought, oh, good, I can do my interior design course. And of course, that was even busier. So what did I then do? We had a history teacher, and she said to us about the law, because we were doing something about law. And I realised it absolutely governs everything we do. You know, in those days, she said, it governs everything from the size of the milk bottle outside your door to how fast you can drive your car into the town. And I just thought, gosh, the law was really interesting. And so I did a law degree at Liverpool, became a solicitor. All I ever wanted to be was middle class. And having done my law degree, qualified as I say as a solicitor, and thought I would be doing things like conveyancing because I was a very shy child. You wouldn't believe it, but I used to cry if a bloke looked at me. Now they cry when I look at them. No.
I was going to say that's turned on its head a little bit, Beverley.
That's not true. And so I ended up doing litigation.
Okay.
And that's why, as I say, I started to do crime. And then I just sort of fell into doing this transport law. Yeah. And then I just found transport law so fascinating. I was doing a training session yesterday with a board of directors, and their in-house legal counsel was there. And he said, because he does all their health and safety, and he doesn't know about transport. It's always like being back at college learning about, you know, a new subject. And I just think it's fascinating. I really do. Yeah, but it's about the people. It's not about the tachograph, you know, or the fifth wheel. It's about the people that are dealing with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think your story is fascinating. I'll be honest with listeners. I was really nervous, and we spoke about this sort of prior to recording the podcast. I was really nervous about speaking to you, obviously with your legal background, but I have got a little bit of experience, not quite so much. But I grew up. My dad was a policeman, but he was a very, very stern policeman, and he served in the police for his full career. He was a career policeman. He didn't actually rank particularly highly over time because the exams came at the wrong time, and he had various struggles with miners' strikes and things like that, which were obviously horrific for him at the time. But he was a very, very strict father, and from a legal point of view, he made it very clear. So I think that's probably why I've ended up doing this, because I enjoy. There's only one way to do things, and that's the right way. But he was also very focused, or he is still very focused on people. It's about people and making sure that people are right. So,
where was he a police officer?
So I'm quite fortunate. I was lucky enough. I live in Peterborough now, which isn't quite as nice. But I grew up in Cambridgeshire. Dad was a Cambridgeshire policeman. He served in Cambridge in St Ives, which is just outside. I'm in Huntingdon.
No, I used to live in Hemmingford Grey.
Did you really? Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, so that's very close to where I grew up. I grew up in a little village called Over, which is just outside St Ives, but on the way to Cambridge.
And I was going to St Ives. I met a man with 7 wives. 7 wives had 7 cats. 7 cats wore 7 hats. Do you remember?
I remember this. Yes,
the little bridge in St Ives. Gosh,
Yeah,
Gosh, what a
beautiful.
small world. Beautiful part of the world.
Yeah, beautiful part of the world. St Ives, and I've it's not long actually ago. So since I've made more of an effort to spend time with Dad. Dad's getting on a little bit now. He'll certainly be listening to this avidly as well. Actually, he really will, and he'll be dead proud that his lad is interviewing the former senior traffic commissioner. He will be dead proud. He really will. And I took him out actually in St Ives for lunch, and then on to James Bond.
Now. I want to meet him because I lived there when I was a little girl. Yeah. In between when we were living in Africa and the Middle East, and I have very fond memories of that part of the world. As I say, we lived in Hemmingford Grey, and oh yes, all sorts of places that I remember.
Dad used to love sorting. He was in the drug squad for a while, so he loved getting crims, keeping the streets clean and all that sort of thing, looking after people.
I'm sure they didn't do drugs in St Ives.
Not in St Ives, I think in Cambridge. I think it was, and Huntingdon. Huntingdon was once upon a time. I think there was some trouble around there, but yeah, no, St Ives is beautiful. St Ives beautiful. When Dad retired, they bought a narrowboat, and they spent a lot of time in St Ives on their narrowboat. So anyway, we digress. Yes. We digress. So my next question was a traffic commissioner based one, and that is, and I suppose this is a really good question leading on from what we've just been talking about. Are the traffic commissioners to be feared by operators?
No, only by the naughty ones.
Yes.
Look. Yeah, Richard Turfitt is the senior traffic commissioner now, and he's an excellent senior traffic commissioner. Obviously, he's an excellent traffic commissioner, and he speaks for the traffic commissioners, and it's not my job to do that at all. But looking at it from a consultant's point of view, from a transport lawyer's point of view, or an operator's point of view, I think the traffic commissioners are actually to be loved by operators. It doesn't feel like it at times. You can go, oh my gosh, they've done this, how can they do that? But absolutely, they're to be loved because, and I used to say it when I was a TC, learn to love your traffic commissioner because they are there to promote road safety and fair competition. And we know what a tough world it is. We know what the profit margins are for the transport industry. They're so small for the compliant operators that what the traffic commissioners are doing is promoting road safety and making sure that it's a level playing field for the operators. And in my view, they quietly get on with it every day, regulating. And, my former colleague, and as I would say, my wee pal, Joan Aitken, because that's what I used to say about her, and she's my wee pal, Joan Aitken from Scotland, used to talk about the invisibility of success. It's great that the great British public don't know about traffic commissioners, because generally they only hear about regulators when it goes wrong. And when those regulators are not effective or they don't use their powers, but TCs just get on with it quietly every day. And so they will put operators out of business who either don't give a fig about it, or operators who are making lots and lots of money because they're not bothering to pay for the cost of compliance. So short answer, love your TC.
That's a great answer. I love that. I wanted to comment, when we sort of spoke previously, you mentioned about a LinkedIn story. It'd be really great for the listeners to hear about that you were accused of being anti-transport businesses.
Yes, I have to do social media now that I've got a training business and a consulting business, and I can't say I like it, I have to say.
I'm not a big fan myself.
And generally, my practice manager does most of it, and she's excellent at it. And every now and again, she says, oh, Beverley, you've not been on LinkedIn, have you? What have you said now? What damage have I got to undo? And I generally don't post a lot, but I did see an article by a lorry driver, and it was at the time when it first hit the public news about, the general press, about the shortage and about the fact that they're not valued, lorry drivers are not valued. And this chap was obviously having a real rant on LinkedIn. And I was agreeing with him, and it was like 4 paragraphs. I was agreeing with him, and I was thinking, I really must write to this chap and go, I completely agree with you. And then it got to the end, and it said, and then you've got people like Beverley Bell rollicking or romping all over social media doing training. She's put too many people out of business. And I thought, I was only doing my job. Maybe I shouldn't. And I
Yeah,
wanted
exactly.
to connect with him. I know, I wanted to connect with him and say, actually, I'm one of the good guys, but I didn't bother.
No.
I said, no, don't, just leave it.
No, absolutely. I think, I think it's absolutely a valid thing that needs doing. So, and that leads me nicely onto my next question, which was actually when you were a TC, what and I suppose even now, what makes a rewarding day for you? What is it that makes you tick and do what you do, Beverley?
Very simple. It's making sure it's when you. So yesterday I did a training session, as I say, with the board of directors, including the chief executive, and it's at the end of that day they knew what their responsibilities were as no license holder, and that's where I get the job satisfaction from. And as a result of that, they are going to change a lot of things they do. Transfer that to a TC role, and you have a public inquiry, and you get some poor unsuspecting chief executive in front of you, who thinks they know everything, and they're generally about 12 years of age, and they look at you as if to say, well, what do you know, Flossie? And then, you explain to them what their responsibilities are, and then they go, oh, yes, of course I'll do that. The difference is, in my old role, if I asked, people generally said yes. Only once did a chap say no, which I can tell you about, which was quite amusing. And then in my current role, I can advise, but they can choose not to take my advice. And I don't have any influence to say you will do it.
Of course.
Can I tell you about the chap?
Tell me about tell me about the chap who said no once upon a time.
It was amusing. It was I won't say who it was. It was a very, very large bus company in a northern city. And they were represented by Stephen Kirkbright, who was they used to be the top 3 transport lawyers, were Stephen Kirkbright, John Backhouse, and Jonathan Lawton. Okay. And Stephen Kirkbright used to sort of puff himself up and make out, how very important he was. And I was just a mere traffic commissioner. What did I know? And this client, I'd asked for them to give me an undertaking. And this transport manager director was a former chappie in the army. Okay. And he really didn't want to give me the undertaking. And I said, well, will you give me this undertaking, Mr. Kirkbright? And he said, I'll take instructions. And he said, no, he won't. And everybody went, I said, no, he won't. No. I'm like, okay. So we got to lunchtime, and a whole load of DVSA guys at the back. We got to lunchtime, and I said, I tell you what, Mr. Kirkbright, after lunch, during lunch, you can speak to your client and find out if you would like to give me the undertaking or not. You know what I'm going to say, don't you, Mr. Kirkbright? He said, yes, of course. So he came back after lunch and said, Mr. Kirkbright, have you taken instructions? Yes. My client has said he would very much like to give you one. And this, he just didn't realise what he'd said. And all these DVSA guys at the back, their shoulders were going up and down, their heads were going down. I'm so grateful, Mr. Kirkbright. That'd be lovely. So anyway, he gave me an undertaking.
Amazing. So since you stopped being the senior traffic commissioner, tell me a bit more about Beverley Bell Consulting and the types of people that you're working with. You've just given a bit of insight that you were working with a sort of senior leadership team, including the chief executive of a business. The business I run, Flagship Partners, probably on a smaller scale than yourself, and probably with smaller operators. We tend to work with more family-owned sort of private businesses and make them help make them. That's not the right terminology. Help them understand what compliance looks like, what great looks like. Who is it you're working with, and how are you doing that, and how is it different to other people out there?
I don't think it is any different from other people out there in terms of the client base. We advise lots of organisations, lots of types of organisations. I do a lot of work with schools on Section 19 permits, and I'm very pleased to do that. And I sort of see that as voluntary work in a way, because schools these days don't have any money, and there are all sorts of issues. So I do a lot of work with schools, and clients can range from large multi-million-pound companies who run commercial vehicles for a living large multi-million pound companies that don't run them for a living and it's ancillary to their main business.
Yeah.
And they're obviously the ones where they have real challenges because they don't have to have a transport manager, although we always advise them to. And then it can be family companies. And it can be family companies that are sort of third or fourth generation. And we do also advise, individuals or small partnerships. So it's right across the board.
Okay.
I think the reason, in terms of what makes me different, I think the reason they come to me is because they think, well, let me be clear, there are two types that come to me. Those that think, well, she probably knows what she's talking about. And there have been one or two who have thought, if I go to her, she'll be able to have some influence with the TCs, or she'll be able to swing it.
I see.
And I make it really clear that I will probably get a far harder time before a TC than the other transport lawyers, and that it just doesn't work like that. Yeah. And generally, I tend to refer those on to other people because it wouldn't be right.
Yes.
To advise those people. And there are one or two, as I say, who fall into the highly non-compliant category, who really would want to use my name, and yes, I send them elsewhere.
Yeah, of course. So you're very selective over who you work with. With regards to public inquiry, one of the questions was, and it sounds from your answer just then, you do represent your clients at public inquiry, although I suppose the plan is to keep them away in the first instance.
Yes, and the plan was never, when I retired, I said, I'm never going to appear before a traffic commissioner at public inquiry and represent an operator. And of course, what did I end up doing? Appearing as a public inquiry representing an operator. And it's not my model, and it's not something I want to continue doing. I really enjoy it because I like the legal argument. Okay. And I do enjoy that. And I like that aspect of it. And again, I like looking after, my clients. But I prefer to be, as I was yesterday, in a very fancy hotel with a lovely lunch, talking to a board of directors about what their responsibilities are and engaging with them. I much prefer doing that. And that's one of the reasons for the company.
Yeah, that's where the value is as well. I think I find it really rewarding when I speak to people who want to do a great job, and helping them understand what's involved and what needs to be done. I find really, really rewarding, enlightening people. And I also think one of the things I get a real buzz out of is making working environments safer. So I think one of the challenges we face with some of the transport operators, particularly I work with, and I'm sure you'll have seen it in your past as well, that people are very quick to blame, shame and retrain. So it's the individual's fault all the time. But sometimes people are victims of their environment and the culture in which they're brought into. And when you deal with management at an influential level, they can actually affect great change within their businesses by creating safer environments and safer conditions for people based on the way that they choose to run their business, based on what's important to the organisation. And when you can start to make those changes at a management level, that's when I think people can enjoy their work a lot more in a safer environment as well.
I absolutely agree. Culture's everything. And once you've got the right culture and it's sort of driven top down, bottom up, then it's much easier. The other thing I really enjoy doing when we go in and do a compliance review is talent spotting. And making, because 90% of operators want to do it properly. The reason things go wrong is often because there's an issue with an individual. It may be that they're not great to be a transport manager. They might be really great at being in charge of the chocolate biscuit machine, but you put them in charge of some trucks and they're like, oh gosh. But more importantly, finding the talent as to where's our next generation of transport managers coming from. I mean, that's one of the main reasons I've done the training company, because there aren't people these days who say, oh, when I grow up, mummy, I want to be a transport manager. And people never say, when I grow up, mummy, I want to go and work in the transport industry. They all end up there by accident. And when they're there, they go, we love it.
Yeah.
And I would really like to develop that whole piece around the professionalism of transport managers. When I was chair, I think logistics, we talked about this all the time. We talked about, professionalising the sector and actually taking a pride in what you do. So that for me is where I get my buzz, where you go into a business and you go, you're good.
Yeah.
And you go to the MD or chief exec or HR or whoever it is and go, they're good.
Yeah.
Have you thought about putting them through the TMCPC?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really, really vital, professionalising the transport manager role, because it's such a vital role in as a middle management level position, which reports to the company directors. Often it may be a director, depending on the company, but the sort of 360-degree management and the skill set that needs, that potentially isn't trained in the TMCPC as part of the exam anyway.
It isn't. I mean, I took my CPC in 2002.
Yep.
And I took it, because I didn't want certain operators going, what do you know about trucks, love?
Of course, yeah.
And I had to earn some credibility. So I went and took the exam. I was terrified. I stood outside the exam quoting, various things to myself that I had to remember, because it was, you couldn't take your books in those days. You had to remember it. And I was absolutely terrified. And I think it's really important that we get the right transport managers. And it's about having the right competencies. I used to say being a traffic commissioner, being a transport manager, very similarly, you have to praise the good.
Yeah. But
you also have to be robust in dealing with the bad.
Yeah.
There's no room for sentiment, and there's no room. I used to waive the legislation that the operator goes, no exemption of being a nice bloke. And it's the same with the transport manager. It's a tough role. You have to be a friend to the drivers, but you also have to be tough with them.
Yeah.
So it's about the skills and competencies that they have. And I suppose, if I wanted to get one message over today, it would be for transport managers, whether they're current or aspiring, to read, and if Richard Turfit's listening, he's going to laugh, paragraph 54 of Statutory Guidance Document number 3, which I'm always banging on about to operators, because that defines the role of the transport manager. And I remember, Richard and I, Richard wrote most of it and I just added a bit, writing it, because it defines what the TM has to do.
There you go. That's really, really great for the listeners to listen to, because they are largely transport managers. I host a group on Facebook, the Transport Managers Hub, which I try and keep. There's lots of groups of communities of transport managers on Facebook, particularly, and some of them are quite negative, and some of them are quite derisory towards each other on occasion in some of the comments. And I try to keep it positive as best I can.
What you mean, the transport managers towards each other?
Yeah. So
why?
Essentially, there's essentially it's a hub where or there's lots of forums on Facebook where transport managers can go and ask questions of each other if they don't know an answer to something, or has someone got experience of this situation.
Oh God, don't show me those.
You didn't even know they existed. You must come and join, Beverley. Come and join my community. No. But yeah, sometimes, and there's people who are training, there's people who are learning, and sometimes the questions can be a little bit, I would say, key stage 1 is probably a nice way of putting them, Beverley. And sometimes people are quite quick to point out that it's a key stage 1 question and people should know this. And sometimes
that's unfair.
Yeah, exactly, because you don't know what someone's journey is. You don't know where they are. And sometimes it's better to just scroll past and just, if you've got nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. Let someone else pick up the slack and sort of help that person in becoming slightly more enlightened. But yeah, I try and keep it positive in the group that I run and manage, and I try to keep it informative. And so one of the things I try and do is the operator CPC exam is fantastic at training transport managers around the legislation and what's required. And one of the things where I try and add a little bit of value where I can is in the softer skills around building influence, managing people, what to do when things go wrong, and how to manage people, which potentially isn't part of the qualification, but it's something that's a vital skill as well. And that's part of the podcast as well. One of the reasons for why I run the podcast is that it gives that free level of CPD for people to listen in to advice and support from people like yourself, Beverley.
I mean, I am aware, obviously, that there are forums on Facebook and on LinkedIn.
I was going to say, I think they're closely watched.
Hi, it's Pete from Flagship Partners. We're really proud to sponsor a Half Dozen Things podcast. At Flagship Partners, we take road safety really seriously, and we're your road safety partnership. We help transport companies with compliance and training across their businesses, including first aid, driver CPC, and other transport management services. So if you're FORS accredited or you want to improve your operator compliance risk score, give Flagship Partners a call today.
I'm not sure. I don't know, but I think they're closely watched. Sure, they say
by
that.
By whom?
By some people in the DVSA, that kind of thing is what's alleged.
I couldn't possibly say, Your Honour, but I think I know that. So Joanna, my wonderful practice manager, she does look at Facebook, and I think we might even have a Facebook page. I don't know. We might have. I know we've certainly got a presence on LinkedIn. But with regard to the Transport Manager CPC exam, does it qualify somebody to carry out the role of transport manager? No, it doesn't. How many transport managers in the 21st century need to know how many hours rest you have to have when you're carrying goats or sheep or pigs or horses or chickens? Very few. How many transport managers have to do the financial calculations and the costings? Very few. How many of them have to know how to read and understand a balance sheet and a profit and loss account? Very few. And this is a subject that's really dear to my heart. And I'm delighted to sit on the CILT. You know, I'm vice president of CILT, which is a great organisation. And there's a group there, which is a sort of working group looking at the Transport Manager CPC exam and saying, well, you know, and the course, is it fit for purpose? Now, of course, it's European legislation. But, you know, one of the things I would really like to see is that exam being much more relevant to the role of the transport manager. And Nick Denton, one of the traffic commissioner for the West Midlands, also sits on that group. And I know that he and also Nick Jones, who's a former TC for Wales, have been engaging with the Department for Transport, looking at the role of the transport manager and the exam. And I think that's all fabulous, whether it's goods or PSV.
That's fantastic. I think to hear there's such involvement and that it's being looked at, because
yes, it is.
There is I think the exam certainly doesn't train. It's almost like, I think the way I liken it is, it's like your driving license. Once you pass your test is when you start to learn. And it's the same with being a transport manager. You pass your exam and you start to sit in the role, and then you start to learn. But there's so many. I think I feel quite fortunate because I fell in love with the sector in a slightly different way to how many people do. I think the development plan tends to look something like good driver takes responsibility, maybe becomes a planner, after doing some planning becomes a transport manager, does their CPC, and sort of goes that way. Whereas I entered from like a maintenance background, having worked for a vehicle manufacturer, and I got used to helping operators be compliant from that point of view particularly. And I think I was quite fortunate because as a manager in a manufacturer, I'd had loads of great development around people management and coaching and dealing with poor performance and all of those things. That it was sort of quite natural. But I think one of the things that I've picked up is that in a lot of transport companies, those things aren't nurtured quite so much, and that can be a challenge for people as they develop through the transport businesses.
I absolutely agree with that. And I think the other thing I would say is that being a transport manager in one company is never the same as being a transport manager in another company, because it depends on the size of the organisation.
Yes.
It depends on the type, especially if it's family companies.
Yeah. And the businesses are so far ranging in what they do as well, you know, from a builder's merchant through to a, you know, a traditional haulier, that the role is so varied. There's elements which will be very similar around what's required to remain compliant, but ultimately the role itself and the type of people you're dealing with and the work they're carrying out is so varied as well.
Can I just ask you a quick question? On your Transport Managers Forum, is it both goods and PSV, or does it just tend to be goods?
We do have both, but because my knowledge tends to be mostly on goods, I don't tend to do too much with PSV anyway. I don't hold PSV myself either. What? That's an interesting question.
Well, why is it an interesting question, Peter? I think, again, the exams are different, obviously, because the legislation's different. But in terms of those other skills, you call them soft skills, those other skills that are needed, whether it's, you know, people management, or having an effective disciplinary process, or having a really good training matrix and scheme. Yes. It's the same skills. They're just transferable. But one of the things that always struck me as a TC, and it certainly strikes me now, is the real differences in the attitudes and cultures in both of the sectors, one goods, one PSV. Neither's better or worse than the other. They're just very different.
Okay. No, that makes sense.
And of course, the poor old PSV industry has been decimated in the pandemic.
They've got some real challenges. Yeah, I really feel for them, particularly whilst transport, to an extent, obviously they face challenges with driver shortages, but a lot of the companies I know that have stood up well are thriving. You know, they've got lots and lots of work. Rates have improved. There's really
on goods.
Rates on goods side has really improved. You know, so one side's really thrived to an extent. Don't get me wrong; it still faces its challenges, and anyone will tell me the challenges they face. But from a financial point of view, there's plenty of cash sloshing around at the moment.
I absolutely push back on that. Okay, when you say that companies are thriving, they are doing better. Many companies are doing better financially than they were. But the profit margins are still tiny. It's still cutthroat out there. Drivers, you know, I'm loving doing this because I feel like I'm standing on a soapbox on, you know, Hyde Park Corner.
No, you carry on.
But drivers are so undervalued by so many companies. Don't get me wrong, you know, there are always fabulous organisations out there who really value their drivers and have great relationships and really look after their drivers. But and you know, I don't want to enter the driver shortage debate. I can only talk about, I definitely don't want to do that, but I can draw on my own experiences, which is how drivers are dealt with by many companies, and it's not good. And it's a race to the bottom in terms of how much they'll pay their drivers, how they're treated. That's why I was so in tune with that driver who was having a rant about having to pee in a bottle on the side of the road, and how there's no facilities and how badly treated they are, not just by, in limited cases, their employers, but by all the people they come into contact with, whether it's at an RDC, whether it's at a customer's premises, or whether it's with the great British public, who don't value the transport costs. They don't value the drivers. They look at a driver and see somebody in their head, you know, with a certain tummy profile, a certain hair profile, chomping on a Yorkie bar. The reality couldn't be further from the truth.
No. Stereotyping.
Yeah, absolutely.
Stereotyping's an awful part of the sector. I think that leads us really nicely onto the next area that I wanted to sort of ask you about, and that was, how do we attract and retain fantastic young talent in the business, and particularly diversifying the industry as well, including getting some fantastic women into the business too. Okay, so the person to ask that question of is my hero, Steve Grannett, from Think Logistics, Abbey Logistics. I'm in love with him. If he knows I'm in love with him, don't worry. He's married with children. But Steve Grannett absolutely has worked so hard to get out there and engage with the world at large in terms of attracting people into the sector and career ready. People like Bethany Windsor,
who works with the Novus Trust, work really hard to get out there and to speak to students, to get students to come and do transport, in their degrees, and to be sponsored by employers. And I'm afraid the only people that can do this are the employers. It's no good expecting government to do it. And much as I absolutely love government and the Department for Transport, why wouldn't I? They paid my salary for 17 years. I think the commercial vehicle sector has to understand that government's not going to help them on this. Well, as I said, I'm not entering the debate on driver shortages and changing the cabotage rules and all that nonsense. But I know an organisation up in Burnley, a family transport company. They have an open day every year. Everybody can come. They have bouncy castles and they have barbecues, and they come and say, we are a really good employer. We will look after you. Remember, it's not just drivers. We need planners, routers, schedulers, back office staff, transport supervisors, and they are a really big employer in their local community and are seen as a really positive place to go and work. I'll shut up in a moment. But the other thing they're very good at is moaning. And they go, it's all really hard, it's already difficult, it's already tough. Well, who wants to go and work somewhere where they it's all really awful? If they're positive and enthusiastic and they present that positive public image, people will want to go and work there. So I tell you what, have you interviewed Steve Granite on your podcast?
I've not, but he sounds fascinating.
Right. Here's your man. I'll ask him if I can send his email address.
That'd be fantastic. I'd be really pleased to speak to him. I interviewed not long ago, actually, Morton Collymore, who's just taken the chairman's role at RHA. What a lovely gent! What a lovely gent he is as well, by the way.
They once delivered, if he's listening, he'll laugh. They once delivered, when I lived in Worcestershire, some gravel to my house. I have never seen such a clean vehicle. Really tidy. Fantastic. It was all covered over. That was when I was at TC. Oh my God, I've never been to Beverley Bell. Let's put my best vehicle out. Lovely, lovely.
Oh, bless them. Yeah, lovely business as well. Really, really nice chap Morton was. And we had an in-depth conversation around the narrative in the sector about the negativity. Morton came into some negativity recently, bless him, on social media when he took the chairman's role around, some negativity around generational businesses and
why? What did they say?
So I think some negativity around we can't change things with the same old names and these sorts of things, which I think is awful. That he had to put up with that negativity from people, and he really does. He's really keen to make a change and improve things for the sector.
That's why I don't like social media.
Yeah, no, it's awful. But I think the challenge is on some level we need somehow, and I don't know the answer. That I've got more questions than answers myself, but somehow that, because that's how the general public are communicating, how do we change the positivity around and the narrative around the sector to be more positive?
Question for Steve Granite. Question for Steve Granite, I think. Poor old Morton. That's why I don't like social media. I was reading in the paper this morning about she's called Tilly, I think, great name, Tilly, who is the daughter of Gordon Ramsay.
Oh, okay.
And apparently she's on Strictly Come Dancing. No, I don't watch Strictly Come Dancing, if you want to ask a question. I know lots of people do. And apparently some DJ from some radio station said she was plump or something. Yeah, absolutely. Your face says it all. Well, what an idiot he is. And, why don't we call that out?
Yeah, absolutely.
We should.
Absolutely, yeah. No, awful. I think, there's such a long way to go, isn't there? I think with certainly around the positivity. And I think it isn't helped by, I think there's a lot of, and this was something Morton and I discussed, there's a lot of bitterness. There's a lot of bitterness in the sector about the way, and it's kind of this vicious cycle. And at some point, we've got to lift above that, a bit above the parapet, and go, you know what? Let's draw a line and let's move forward.
Bitterness about what?
I think particularly drivers, I think, because of the way they've been treated for so many years, and that I think they realise that this has been a challenge in the sector for so many years around conditions and pay and those things. There's an awful lot of bitterness towards transport managers, towards the industry as a whole, towards the sector. I think that people exist in it rather than thrive in it. And I think that's something we need to change, that people actually thrive in their career. But that's a big thing, isn't it?
That's why things like all those awards events are so good, because it celebrates the good, excuse me, and it celebrates best practice, and it celebrates people. Whether it's the CILT awards night, which they have every year, or whether it's the motor transport awards, or coach and bus awards, all of those things are great. Yeah. And there's so much that can be done. Yeah. I'll ask Steve Granitt if I can.
Yeah, I think celebrating success is an enormous part of improving engagement and motivating workforces. Is a great way of improving that.
Do I think external transport managers can be as effective as internal ones? Because I do think that question that I've just posed is one that I am asked sometimes.
Okay.
And again, there can be some negativity around external transport managers. The legislation is the same. It's continuous and effective management. Okay, so as long as the external transport manager can carry out that continuous and effective management, I think there's absolutely always going to be a place for external transport managers, because in a way, they have many strengths. Obviously, I'm talking about the good ones, because they will come in and they will be external. There'll be a fresh pair of eyes. They won't have those operational challenges that an internal transport manager might have. Mm-hmm. So they won't necessarily know that I've got to get this load out, and actually, it would be really good if I could just slip the safety inspection a couple of days, because I've got to do this load. They will come in and they will say, no, it's got to be done now.
Yes.
And as long as you've got a continuous and effective management being carried out, and for me, it's always about how are the drivers being managed. I'm not a fan of, well, I'll work as a TM on a Saturday, or I'll come and do it on a Sunday morning, or I'll do it Thursday afternoon between 4 and 5. Mm-hmm. It's what happens when things go wrong, what happens when the drivers have done their driver daily walk around check. And I know some don't do it, but most do. When they've done their driver daily walk around check and there's a defect, is the system effective for them to report into the right person so that the vehicle either has a defect rectified there and then, or it's taken off the road? That's the challenge, I think, for the external TM.
Yeah. And I think that's improved with digital management systems, where notification can be immediate, and the right people who have got the right control are able to manage those things, aren't they? Because whilst they're remote, there's a digital notification, whether that person's on site or not, in which they are able to then pick up and manage that situation.
Yes, and that's the other thing I wanted to talk about. I think it's two things. It's the whole COVID thing. We've all changed how we work as a result of COVID because we've had to. And so a lot of us do now work, open quotes, remotely, close quotes. But remotely, we all know what we mean. Oh, we've got a remote, worker. It doesn't mean they're remote in the old-fashioned traditional sense of the word. You can still be continuous and effective on the end of a Zoom call. You can still be continuous and effective using a WhatsApp group to communicate with drivers. You can still be continuous and effective if you've got a driver defect reporting app, provided the drivers are using it properly.
Yes.
And when I was a TC, the staff would write to an operator who wanted to cover 4 operating centres, one in England, one in Scotland, one in Wales, and one in wherever else. And they would say, well, what are the travelling distances? Yes. Well, it takes me 4 hours to get to Peterborough. And then the next day I go to Glasgow, blah, blah, blah. And of course, they would say, well, no, you're not continuous and effective. Now, I think the real challenge is, and again, this is as much a challenge for the traffic commissioners as it is for the industry, in terms of how you reflect those massive changes in saying, well, a transport manager can be continuous and effective in their role, even if they are not going to Glasgow and Peterborough every week or every fortnight. They still have to go, you still have to visit, but so much now can be done remotely. And it's the same with the digital tachograph analysis. It's the same with the digital vehicle management systems.
Yeah.
But there's a real value in the transport manager just turning up unannounced one morning, just like DVSA do, and going, well, I know you thought I was here next week, but actually,
I'm here now.
Here today.
I'm here now. Let's have a walk around that vehicle and have a chat about it.
Let's do a gate check.
Yeah.
Let's do a gate check. Let's get the clipboard out.
Yeah. Let's have a good chat about how work's been over the past few weeks and what's going on. And
driver health, mental health, physical health.
Yeah.
Are you all right, love? Yeah, I'm fine. Standard answer. Yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah. Are you really okay? So what's really happening? Absolutely. Absolutely. Beverley, it's been absolutely fantastic. I can't believe how quickly an hour has flown by with us chatting about transport, and what a fantastic interview it's been. I really, really appreciate you joining me. How do people find out more about Beverley Bell Consulting? Should they go on LinkedIn and find you?
No, don't go on LinkedIn. just Google beverleybell.co.uk. Perfect. And they can get in touch with you that way. That's fantastic. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope listeners have got a lot of value out of this. I certainly have, and it's been fantastic to have you join me. Thank you very much, Beverley. Well, thank you. Thank you for being so nice to me, and thank you for inviting me, Peter. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
I really hope you loved today's episode, and if you did, please make sure you subscribe and listen out for future episodes too. Please do share it across your social media channels. We hope to reach more and help more people. If you want to find out more about me, my name's Pete Rushmer. You'll find me across any social media channel and my business Flagship Partners, and we're your partners in success across your business. Thank you. See you again soon.